Hello, today I thought I'd take a look at my Michael Harding watercolour paints. I store these along with my M. Graham watercolours in this tin. This is a Prismacolor pencil tin, and I spray painted the lid so that it matches the big pencil tins which I keep all of my watercolour pans and half pans in. So my rather battered looking ones now. I'd originally bought just the moss green quite a while back so that I could try out Michael Harding's for the first time. And then I'd picked up 5 more that I'd wanted to try out. And I've got those in this little Roman Szmal tin. They've all been fine in there except for the Turner's Yellow, which seems to be a little bit runnier and leaked out onto the other paints when it was turned on its side. So I'm just keeping this palette flat for the time being. But then I recently bought a large bundle of watercolours from eBay, and included in that were these Michael Harding paints. I've not tried all of these out yet, so today I'm going to swatch out all of the paints that I've got and just get a bit more feel for them. So the tubes are all 15ml metal tubes, and I quite like the labelling because they've got the name and also the pigment information on the front. Then conforms to ASTM, that's to do with the light fastness of it. And here you're given light fastness, not as a star or number rating, but it says excellent. Staining power high, granulation no, transparency semi-transparent. So all the regular information you'd expect of professional watercolour paints. I'll swatch out into circles, and as I usually do, I'll try and have a more concentrated side and then a more watery side. So this is Yellow Lake PY 180, and it's beautifully pigmented and seems to flow very nicely. Well, that seems to be an absolutely beautiful clear mid-yellow. Then we've got Turner's Yellow, which is one of the ones I'd picked out. And this is a kind of a softer, more of a Naples yellow. It's not quite as highly pigmented as the Yellow Lake. I'm not really a big yellow fan, but both of these are absolutely beautiful and thoroughly enjoyable to paint with. Next up is Brilliant Orange. So the Brilliant Orange is PO62. These so far have all had excellent light fast rating, and the Brilliant Orange is transparent. I've just got out my watercolour swatch folder so I can show a few comparisons. I don't have any PY 180s. I think the closest thing I've got is a PY 153, though in the mass tone it doesn't have quite as much warmth as this PY 180 does, but they both have an absolutely lovely vibrancy. And this Turner's Yellow has got a little bit of granulation to it. This is Winsor & Newton Naples Yellow, but the Turner's Yellow is a little bit brighter than Naples Yellow, and it's more transparent. I think this Turner's Yellow is just more interesting with its granulation and transparency. Then I've just got one other PO62, and that's Winsor & Newton's Winsor Orange. And they're fairly similar, though I think maybe the Brilliant Orange is a little bit redder. I'm swatching on Canson XL watercolour paper, by the way, and I'm using a size 8 silver black velvet brush. This is how I do most of my swatches, so for me this is a useful comparison to do it this way. And next we've got Rich Scarlet. So that's a PR 122 with very good light fastness and semi-transparent. It was incredibly rich out of the tube, very pigmented and smooth. And out of my paints, it's closest to Sennelier Red PR 254. Though if you look where it's watered out, the Sennelier Red is a little bit warmer, whereas that's a little bit more purpley pinky leaning. So I don't have anything exactly like that. Then next up is Scarlet Lake. So the Scarlet Lake is actually quite similar to the Rich Scarlet, but I'd say a tiny little bit cooler. I don't have lots of reds, and I don't have a PR 170. Again, the closest that I've got to this is still the Sennelier Red, the PR 254. Then I've got Pyro Crimson. So then the Pyro Crimson is PR 264, and it's most similar to Roman Szmal's Pyro Rubin, although this is maybe a little bit less brown. I'd say that so far all of the paints have been really pigmented and very easy to disperse with the water. Then next I've got Rose Doré, which I already had. This is more orangey, I should have had it over there. Never mind. I'd been really attracted to this colour when I'd seen it being swatched out. The only experience I had before of Rose Dorés was Winsor & Newton's, and that's a very different kind of paint. It's the same pigments, though listed in different order, but the Winsor & Newton is quite hard to re-wet, and it's not very pigmented at all, and it's much more orangey. Whereas the Michael Harding, even in dried out pan form, is still incredibly easy to re-wet. You see how much I'm getting just from one pass there. Then Quinacridone Rose. None of these have had any separation yet as I've been opening them. So that's a very vibrant Quinacridone Rose, PV19. That's it compared with Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose. And this is Winsor & Newton's Permanent Rose. Then another of the tubes which I'd bought previously, and this is Perylene Violet. I like this one so much. I just corrected this one. I'd written 122 and it's PR112, the Rich Scarlet. So the other Perylene Violet I've got is this Roman Szmal. And it's the same pigment number, but it's quite a different colour. It's much more of a reddy purple. And I don't have any other purples like this either. Naphthalmide Maroon's completely different. Quinacridone Violet is much more pinky and lighter. And Dioxazine Purple's a completely different thing again, much more blue. Then when I'd been picking out my original Michael Harding colours, it had been a toss-up between the Perylene Violet and this Corinthian Purple. So when I saw this in the eBay bundle, I was really excited to try it out as well. So another absolutely delicious purple, and that's a mixture of PR112, PP29 and PV23. And even though it's got the PB29, which is ultramarine blue and granulating, the paint is classed as non-granulating. And I'd say the Corinthian purple is kind of somewhere between Roman Szmal's Perylene Violet and Winsor & Newton's Permanent Magenta. So just give you a closer look of the first page. The Canson XL paper, which is cellulose paper, isn't particularly good for getting a really smooth wash with, like 100% cotton paper is, but it is good at bringing out any granulation if there is some. One thing I have noticed with a couple of the paints, I don't know if it can be picked up, but there is a tiny bit of kind of texture to some of the paints. I don't know if it's picking up at all, like tiny little bits of flocculation. Then the next colour is called Moonlight. So the Moonlight seems like it's very close to Daniel Smith's Moon Glow. It's exactly the same pigments, PG18, whoops, smudged my ink, PB29 and PR177. The PR177 fades a little bit, whereas Daniel Smith's Moon Glow is classed as number 1, which is the highest light fast rating. Michael Harding has theirs as low to good, which seems a bit more accurate for something with PR177 in it. I can possibly see a little bit more of the green, the PG18, settling out than in the Moon Glow, but we'll look at it again when it's dried a bit more. It might possibly be more similar to Roman Szmal's Shadow Violet, because you can see the green a little bit more in this one. That's PG50, PB29 and PV19. And the Moonlight was a little bit less pigmented straight out of the tube than the others so far. Then another of the paints which I'd picked out for myself, and this is Lapis Lazuli. And this is a low tinting strength paint. This is just the most gorgeous, delicate, granulating blue. Even when it's dried in the pan though, this is definitely easier to re-wet than my other lapis lazuli. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, that re-wets quite well, as do all the Michael Harding paints. They do seem to dry on the stickier side. Though, as I said, the Michael Harding's Turner's Yellow is the only one which actually spilled out of its pan when it was tipped upside down for an extended time. It's quite a different colour from my other lapis lazuli. So this is A Gallows, and that's my Roman Szmal's lazurite. In some ways, it's almost like a cobalt blue, though less pigmented and more granulating. Then we're on to Ultramarine blue. I'm interested to swatch this one out. Oops. And compare it with some other ultramarines that had a bit of binder in that then. That's better. I'm very curious to see how granulating that is once it's dried a bit more. Then we've got Phthalo Blue Red shade. Which, as you'd expect from a phthalo, is incredibly pigmented. And then we've got Vivid Blue. And this feels like a very opaque one. I think it's got white in it. So that's a very pretty, fun convenience mixture. And it's a mixture of whites, phthalo blue and phthalo green. And it's the first opaque paint that I've had so far. Then we've got Aqua Green. So that's a mixture of PG7 and PB15-3. So a phthalo green and a phthalo blue. It's actually the same colours in this without the white, although leaning more to the green side than the blue. Then we've got Moss Green, which was the very first Michael Harding paint that I bought. And this is a really nice, bright convenience green. This is a mixture of PY150, so it's got that real vibrance to it, PB29 and PR209. And this one is supposed to granulate. Then this forest green I had swatched out in a previous video and it had separated quite a lot. So I'm going to squeeze some of this into a pan and give it a good mix around. I've already mixed it a bit with a cocktail stick down to the bottom. Because when I first swatched it out last time, it was a little bit like pale swamp water, which isn't what it's supposed to look like. I think that looks a little bit more like what it's supposed to look like anyway. So that's a mixture of PBR7, the brown, and PB15-1, the phthalo blue. And this is supposed to be a granulating one. And then we'll finish off with 2 earth colours. The first is French Yellow Ochre. So that felt like a slightly more sluggish, heavy pigment, which is not altogether unusual for a yellow ochre. It's not quite as opaque as some other yellow ochres. It's classed as semi-transparent, and it's a PY43. Then the very last one is one that I picked out myself, and that's Burnt Sienna. So this burnt sienna has rapidly become my favourite burnt sienna. Previously I would have said it's Winsor & Newton burnt sienna. I do like the more orange leaning transparent ones, and this is just absolutely beautiful. It's also got some granulation as well, so it's kind of my perfect burnt sienna. So that's the Moonlight, now it's nearly dried. Out of the 3, I'd probably opt for the Shadow Violet because it's the light fast one. Beautiful granulation in the lapis lazuli. Now the ultramarine blue hasn't fully dried yet, but I'd say that it doesn't look like it's a strongly granulating one. So if you look at Schmincke's, for example, which is my most heavily granulating one, and then you've got the really quite smooth ones like Snellier's Ultramarine Deep. I'd say that the Michael Harding one is a bit more granulated than that. It's probably closer to the Daniel Smith's French Ultramarine. Got the really strong phthalo blue red shade. Overall then, I'd say that the smooth Michael Harding paints, so like quinacridones and perylines, aren't quite as smooth as some other brands that I've used, like Daniel Smith's, and their granulating paints aren't quite as granulating as some other brands that I've used. But the clarity and vibrancy of the colours is absolutely beautiful, and they are just a joy to paint with. I've heard some people say that Michael Harding's have become their favourite watercolour brands, and I can see why people would say that. It's been absolutely lovely painting these out today. I'd originally bought the eBay bundle of watercolours just to have a bit of fun with and then sell on, but I think I will be keeping some of the new ones. I particularly like the Yellow Lake, the Turner's Yellow I'd bought anyway and will definitely keep. I don't use reds very much, but I'm hanging on to my Rose Doré that I already had. and the Perylene Violet, and then the Corinthian Purple as well. I absolutely adore the Lapis Lazuli. The moss green I had. I really quite like this forest green, and actually as far as yellow ochres go, this is one I quite liked. And then the burnt sienna, which I love. So I hope this was useful if you're trying to decide about some different Michael Harding colours. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye!